For 5 seconds. Colburn shoots, deflected, score! The Flyers tie it with 2.8 seconds remaining. Excellent for them. So the Penguins have had leads of 2-0. 3-1. Now Couturier ties it at 5. Sean Couturier with his second goal of the night.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 177. Welcome to the podcast for the fifth most improved hockey team in the NHL. Oh, well, better check the math on that one. We'll get back to you. And, well, you know, we have a trade deadline in less than 48 hours, and I don't think there's much left. This might be an unprecedented level of activity. But before we get to all that, let's introduce the panel before we bring our guest on. Chef B is actually representing Flyers Nitty Gritty at the game tonight. So in his stead, actually back from a sabbatical, is the great Dan Silver. What is on your mind, man?
I'm mad, Isaiah. I'm mad.
Why you have to be mad?
French, yeah. Why you have to be mad? I'm so mad and frustrated with this organization. I don't know. It's it's very, very annoying. It's actually, I've been really mad the last few days. Disappointed, mad, frustrated. We can get into all that, but
it's almost like you just hope it gets worse because the curtain will be pulled back so far. The people above the general manager will have no choice. Especially
everything that gets announced is like gut punch after gut punch after gut punch. It's just, but.
Yeah, we'll get in that. Before we get in and introduce our esteemed guest, let's just remind everybody that the O&B Puckcast is available on 12 podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Deezer. We have a YouTube channel. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast, and it'll come right up. We have a Facebook page. We also have a backup plan for social media. We're on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. Of course, we're on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Please rate and subscribe on the aforementioned platforms. It's really important because it moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast, and that really puts our name out there. We really do appreciate it. And without any further ado, let's welcome the senior writer from thefourthperiod.com. He's on Hot Stove TFP. And of course, he's also with his buddy John Hogan on Kings of the Podcast. We call him DB, Dennis Bernstein. How are you, my friend?
I'm in, Dan. Kind of quiet here in Los Angeles these days, but great to be with you today.
Yeah. They dropped a little bit of a bomb last time. They would just touch on that briefly. Jonathan Quick gets moved, and why don't you fill us in with the details on that?
Yeah, so Jonathan Quick, look, they're an improved team right now. Quick goes to Columbus with a first and a third. Gavrikov and Korpisalo come back. And I know Korpisalo is a mixed bag. You look at the save percentage, it's really good, but Look, I wrote it early this week about the Kings. It's a matter of trust, not cost. And Blake just didn't trust that this team could go deep in the playoffs. And there's opportunity in the West because it's wide open. Maybe the Colorado's getting healthy, and maybe the trade for Lars Eller makes them a lot stronger to contend for their to defend their championship. But it was a necessary move. They've been looking for a lefty a long time. They waited and waited on Jacob Chikrin, and they just couldn't get it done. And that's why you saw it happen last night, because they had to pivot. There were other suitors for Gavrikov, which was the main reason they acquired it. They made the deal with Columbus. They pulled the trigger, and the timing was unfortunate. That trade was actually consummated on a phone call right after the Kings beat Winnipeg last night. There wasn't a lot of time to prep Jonathan Quick with respect to giving him time and runway to process everything. He didn't have no trade protection. So it wound up he's going now. I'm not sure he's staying in Columbus. It looks like in our Dave Pagnier is reporting that he's going to probably, of all places, wind up in Vegas with the Golden Knights. And if that happens, Kings fans are really going to have a few drinks tonight.
Yeah, well, he certainly have a lot of fans. There happens a lot of transplants over to Vegas in recent years, so that's an interesting subplot to that situation. Before we get into the rest of the trade deadline, I wanted you to touch on, and Dan, feel free to chime in here. Chuck Fletcher holds a pre-trade deadline presser, and with all the activity, as I said earlier, it's really unprecedented. I don't know if there's ever been so much before the actual day in recent NHL history. It kind of behooved Chuck to get out there and kind of present some kind of vision, because up to now, it's really been Tortorella who had kind of taken over that role. And it was really a mixed bag. And in light of what's happened since he's been here for almost 5 years, it's mainly the negatives are so strong coming out of it. What was your impression?
My impression is he could have done better. But here's the thing: the assets that they have to trade as rentals aren't attractive. Like JVR Nick Seeler isn't going to excite anybody. So, the big moves he needs to make is going to be in the offseason, because you can't move a Provorov, you can't move a Konechny, whoever, you can't move a Sanheim right now. It's just too much heavy lifting. So I get it, and I get why Flyer fans are upset, because that was a whole bunch of nothing that he basically delivered. And fifth best team, fifth most improved team. I mean, come on. Even if that was true, the math was right. So is that going to give anybody any sense of satisfaction? No, because when you look at other teams like Buffalo, like Ottawa, like Detroit, that's passed by the Flyers, and they're definitely better teams right now, you have a right to be upset, but the story really isn't written. It's better written on July 15th. Once we go through free agency and another batch of trades, if this is the same roster at opening a training camp, then yeah, there should be axes and fire and everything else from Flyer fans. But I get why they'd be upset right now, because that doesn't really give you, like you mentioned, it doesn't tell about vision or when this team plans to go or how they need to get back to contender status, because clearly they aren't right now.
No, absolutely. I'm coming off a 61-point season. I don't know if said improvement is really anything to brag about. But before I get Dan to chime in here, I think, Kevin Hayes is another player in there. And I think what the frustration is with, you see all the money and the 3-team deals and these general managers getting creative. And it's really all about moving salary. And the Flyers desperately, and I said this last week, and Dan, you were not there, but it really, there's a heavy lift this offseason. If you could offload about $5 million of that salary now, it would make that job a lot easier for Fletcher or whoever his successor will be. And it just seems like these other GMs are really being inventive, creative, however you want to put it. And that's what we really are as frustrated about, even as much as what we're seeing on the ice, which has been, of course, for February, disaster.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely part of it. Like, GMs have to get creative. That's your job. I mean, the problem, DB, is that it's not just now. It's what's happened for the last 2 years. Right. It's what happens when you think that you're going to be competitive and you trade away a first and second round draft pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. You trade away a second round pick to get somebody to take Shane Gostisbehere, who today was was traded for a third round pick, and then you trade away a second, third, and fourth round pick for Tony DeAngelo, who's basically the same player as Shane Gostisbehere. So 1 year you'd give away a second round pick to get someone to take Shane Gostisbehere. Then a few years later, you trade away a second, third, and fourth for Tony DeAngelo, who, by the way, could have been had the previous offseason for a fourth round pick, which is what Carolina got him for. Then you see that, okay, the Wild need a veteran forward, and there's rumors of JVR. Then you see two other teams trade veteran forwards to the Wild. Not JVR. Then you see Carolina rumors. Carolina might need a veteran forward. Mm-hmm. Then you see another team trade a veteran forward to Carolina. Right. And you can't tell me that Tanner Jeannot is worth a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth round pick. All of those, he was traded for all of those picks, and JVR is not worth anything. So to me, he's just not doing anything. He's basically sitting back. He literally has not done anything. He has some marketable assets. JVR, Braun will get maybe a fifth or a sixth round pick. Nick Seeler, if they decide they move him. But as Isaiah said, it's more than that. It's trying to get creative. They've acknowledged that they've been taking calls on Ivan Provorov for the last 4 to 5 weeks. Now, maybe there's not something that fit, but I guarantee you that the LA Kings would have been a team that might have some interest in a guy like Provorov. I don't know what the conversations have been like. It's just the sense that there's not much going on right now, and there needs to be stuff going on. And I understand that in the offseason is when hopefully they'll be able to move guys like Kevin Hayes. But at the beginning of last season, they extend Travis Sanheim to a 7 or 8 year deal instead of letting John Tortorella have a chance to evaluate him. And he's evaluated him. He's been a healthy scratch this year, which is kind of crazy for a guy that Chuck Fletcher just extended to 8 years. So there's just so much that has just made no sense. And now you get the sense that Fletcher is just sort of, he comes into this press conference yesterday and he throws this stat out there that, the Flyers we're actually the fifth most improved team in the league based on points percentage. What the hell does that mean? The Montreal Canadiens are the third most improved team in points percentage. You see their GM out there telling their media that, hey guys, relax. We're the third most improved team in the entire league based on points percentage. Like, this guy is a clown. What is he doing? He's not doing anything.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Dan. So my question to you is, are you really going to feel better if they get a fourth round pick for JVR and a fifth round pick for Justin Braun? Because if you use what Brisbaugh is thinking, he said when he traded all those picks, those picks are never going to come players. So he could do something, but in the big picture, trading JVR or Justin Braun is not making this team better. And if you want to argue it, look, I get it. Like, the team isn't good, but you guys have a short memory, because I remember watching this team last year, and that team sucked. That was a bad team that had no structure. That gave that 5-2-0, 5 minutes into the game, the games were over. So there's been improvement, not to the extent that you want, or it doesn't show in the standings, but at least there's some structure. At least there's some accountability that there wasn't there. Now, what does that get you?
We agree.
That gets you.
100%. The only reason that I have any semblance of positivity surrounding this team right now is this John Tortorella and the structure that he's put in, and the knowledge that he has a lot of sway in the front office now, because their effort level is much better. The problem is that John Tortorella has basically said the problem is we don't have enough high-end talent. We don't have high-end talent. So Chuck Fletcher could have positioned this franchise in a way where they, likely would have been one of the worst 3 or 4 teams in the league this year. And then you have a legitimate shot to get a Bedard or a Fantilli or a Mishkov. But instead, it's just the same old thing where the team's not good enough to make the playoffs. And they're also probably going to be drafting around 7 or 8, where they'll get a pretty good player. But, it's just sort of that perpetual mediocrity. And then you see other teams adding all these picks. I mean, look at the Chicago Blackhawks. They've got 7 or 8 first-round picks in the next few years. Same thing with the Vancouver Canucks. Then you look at the New Jersey Devils, who did a full-on tank, basically, And they ended up with Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and they're now one of the better teams in the league, and they still have one of the best prospect pools in the league. They still have Simone Nemeth, and they still have Luke Hughes. Like, it's just a sense that there's basically not much hope of becoming a perennial cup contender because they've never bottomed out. Whereas a team like the Devils did it properly, and now the Devils are not only better than us, but they have a better prospect pool than us. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, it makes perfect sense, Dan. If you want to bottom out, then here's what you do. You trade Provorov for a first-round pick plus. You trade Sanheim for a first-round pick plus. Like, and as you guys know, being mediocre is death in this league. Like, you never get out of it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you have to make one way, because I don't think he can make moves with futures. Okay, that's going to move this team to where the Devils or the Rangers are. So yeah, it's a big problem. But again, like, okay, it's March 1st. If it's the same roster on July 15th, what are they going to do? Who's going to improve? I mean, Farabee has really underachieved. But a guy like Kevin Hayes, he's not attractive at a $7.1 million cap hit. He'd be attractive at $5 million. So they're going to have to do some retention. Pro, maybe not. 6 for a guy who can play on top pair. That seems to be fair. But again, you're going to have to move some big parts of, like guys, you're going to have to be the offseason to really resurface this team. Because you're right. You're both right. The way this team is presently constituted, they're lucky to be a 10th place team next season.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. And you know, as we're recording, big trade just went down, DB, get your initial thoughts. Jacob Chickern is finally moved, but it's not to a location many people were thinking. He goes to the Ottawa Senators for a 2023 conditional first-round pick, a 2024 conditional second-round pick, and that's from the Capitals that the Senators had, a 2026 second-round pick that originally did belong to Ottawa. And there's some conditions on that. I'll let you, just get your initial impression. I don't want to bore people with details. They can get them on Twitter.
Well, it's probably a little less than what the initial reports were of 2 first-round picks and a prospect. Or it's a lot for that play. And the funny thing about Ottawa, what have they been looking forever? For a right defenseman. And he's a left defenseman. So they trade for a left defenseman, which is kind of, I don't know. I think that the Kings offer, I'm not sure exactly what it was. It probably was better than that. Maybe they didn't want to trade him in the West. But not surprising because it had to end. This guy had not played a game since February 10th, guys. And I know there's nothing in the CBA about healthy scratching a player, but enough's enough. They had to move him. Bill Armstrong thought this was the best deal he could have possibly gotten out of it. Now he moves on to a franchise that, again, in the East is they're going to make some noise next season. Yeah,
I mean, you got Stützle, Shabbat. You're getting some finely aged wine in Claude Giroux right now. So, yeah, it took a long time, and the ownership was definitely an obstacle, but things are looking up in Ottawa. But, DB, let me I traced the beginning of this crazy pre-trade deadline activity to January 30th and the Bo Horvat deal to the Islanders. I think that's kind of where it all kind of really picked up for Beauvillier. Turate is a pretty good prospect and a first-round conditional pick. It looks like the Islanders are buoyed by that, and they've really picked up since then, even though they've had some injury setbacks.
Yeah, that makes them a better team. The move they had to make, they needed more scoring. If they had any shot at making the playoffs, which it's still dicey because they've played something. There's teams that have 4 games in hand on that team. What's his necessary move? I would have liked them, and I don't think they're going to get one more move because they're still not scoring like at the level they need to. But that's a quality guy who wins a ton. I think he's 2nd or 3rd in the league in winning faceoffs. And then to line him up behind Brock Nelson and I guess Barzal would have been a center, but he's not anymore. And Pajot. What it leads to me is the fact that they probably make a trade in the offseason and probably move Pajot out. He'd be a very valuable 3C on a lot of contending teams. So while they have a lot of depth in the middle, they don't have a ton on the wing. So if you would move out a Pajot, then maybe at that point you bring back a winger to help a little bit more with the scoring. But this is Lou's last stand, basically. He doesn't have a contract for next season. He had to make a move because his team was really suffering offensively, and then Barzal going out, there was a huge offensive challenge. So a necessary move that really, as you mentioned, Isaiah, kind of started all the dominoes to fall.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And then, of course, the Blues make a couple of moves. With Tarasenko goes to the Rangers.
Yeah.
They weren't done. We'll get to that. And Ryan O'Reilly goes to Toronto. And a three-team deal where the Wild took some a pick and held some salary to make that work for the Leafs. And the Leafs are all in because you get Achari, they get Jake McCabe and Sam Lafferty. Yeah. And it's quite an arms race. Just looking at Tarasenko there, and that they seem to turn things on a little bit when they got him, and Mikkola, who's a good defenseman too.
Well, for St. Louis, like Army, Doug Armstrong's a really loyal guy, and his core was still there from who won with him in 2019. But he saw the way this team was playing. They waved the white flag. They did the right thing. They may trade Parenko as well. But they haven't. See, unlike the Flush, they have Thomas. They have Cairo. Like they have young players. Like Bennington, maybe he bounces back, but a necessary move because this core in St. Louis wasn't winning anymore. It was over. It was done. Move those players out. Toronto made great moves. Like those are the type of players they need. They need an O'Reilly in the playoffs to beat Tampa. They need an Achari. Like I really like what they did because they addressed their toughness. They addressed their grit, and they're going to need that because assuming they play Tampa in the first round, it's going to be a 6 or 7 game series, and you're going to need quality players, guys that drag you into the fight to beat Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay is now loaded up with a guy that they really like in Tanner Janelle. So it's necessary moves. And, you look at these teams that made the big swings in the East, guys, you can't really fault any of them. Like they're actually all really, really good moves. And the one I think overarching theme is that finally, after years and years and years of begging GMs to get creative, they're finally getting creative. There's more 3-team deals.
Most of them are getting creative.
We know of one exception. I'm sorry. Go ahead. We apologize.
Fair enough. No, the guys who have made trades have been very creative. I'm waiting for the comparable trade to what the Nets did with Jay Crowder and trade him for 5 second-round picks in the NBA. That probably doesn't happen in the NHL. But I think I think that you have to maneuver around the cap. A lot of teams in LTIR. How do you make moves? Like you get a third team involved, or how do you make a team move to you? You put in some more draft picks. And I'm with Breezeball. Like look, I'm a Rams fan, so I saw Les Need say "F them picks," traded everybody, won a Super Bowl. That's the attitude that they're taking in Tampa. I really like it, and I think more and more you're starting to see it. Look today, the Gossespierre, he was traded for a pick in 2026. Like, no one cares about that pick right now, and he has a third-round pick. But that's what you're starting to see. Picks traded 3-4 years from now because GMs know, like, I don't have any idea what that player is going to be like, and I need help now. So kudos to the rest of the league, maybe not the Flyers GM, for being really creative here at this deadline, and that's why you see all this activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, the Bruins, best team in the league, really by far this year, bulk up with Garnet Hathaway and Dimitri. Don't call me Bobby Orlov, who had a great night last night with 2 goals. And they look dynamite.
But when you put Orlov on your third pair, all right, like the team is trying to break a record for most wins ever in the NHL. And they had this guy. And they were after Gavrikov. They were after Chychrun. But then when Washington waved the white flag and said, Orlov's available, wow, they jumped right in and said, what is it going to take? And they got it done. So kudos Don Sweeney. And see, here's the thing. Unlike they had to make that move in Boston. You know why? Bergeron's 37, Krejci's 36. They're both free agents at the end of the year. They still haven't signed Pasta, or I expect them to pay him, right? But they got to win this year. Like those 2 guys, those 2 centers, and not only that, they got him in a $3.5 million cap hit. Bergeron and Krejci. Like that's unheard of. Like so, this is it. So Don Sweeney emptying the vault, going for Orlov, going for Garnet Hathaway. I totally get it because the window. It's closing as soon as the last game's played this season. They will not be the same team last season. So kudos to him for being aggressive and knowing that this is their last shot to win a cup, for at least for this group of players.
Did you guys see that Philip Hronik was traded for a first-round pick?
Yeah.
That was what is Vancouver doing? I don't know, DB, if you have some insight. What is Vancouver doing trading for a guy who's probably just going to be trading a first-round pick that's probably going to be a mid-first-round pick from the Islanders for a guy who's 25 years old and is I guess he's an RFA in a few years, but he's only guaranteed to be there for another 3 years with the Canucks, a team that's rebuilding. Why would they trade a first round pick for him?
Well, Dan, I think if you add up the assets from the Horvat trade and the Hronek trade, it's basically Horvat for Hronek. I don't know what they're doing. They need to get younger and better on the blue line. This guy has played well. He hasn't played great with Ben Sherratt, and now people starting to point at Ben Sherratt saying he's the reason why that Hronek's not played well. But I don't know what they're doing. They're going to trade Brock Besser. They're not going to trade JT Miller right here at the deadline, maybe in the offseason. There's a lot of work to do. So, to be frank, I'm not sure what they're doing. Like, this is a team that changed the coach, hasn't made great moves. You know, and here's the problem with Vancouver. It's not these trades. It's having like Connor Garland at 4.9 and having McCabe at 4.7. Like those middle guys paying $5 million a year. Like, you can't do that in this league anymore. So it's a long climb up. And not for nothing, Pettersson's been fantastic for them. If you watch what Quinn Hughes has done in the second half of the season, he's been tremendous. So they have a couple of parts, but again, you trade Bo, who's the captain. You're going to trade Besser, who has underachieved. That's a rebuild as well, because I don't think they're close. So one saving grace of Vancouver is that the West isn't really that scary. So maybe with a couple of moves in the offseason, that's fine. But you can't trade OEL, because remember, OEL waived to go to Vancouver. He's not going to waive to go out of Vancouver. He's getting paid. He likes it up there. It's easy to play for him there. So it's to answer your question, Dan, I'm not sure that what the moves they're making are going to get them back to contention. I got to wait and see what the return will be for Besser, and if they do trade JT Miller, and they do, then you're really looking at a rebuild in Vancouver with a couple of good players.
This is just sort of I've heard, just vague rumors about Quinn Hughes. You think they would ever move him? I know the Devils would love to get all three Hughes brothers together.
I don't know. That would have to be a massive return, because the kid is playing like at Norris Trophy level.
He's the leading scorer in the so far in 2023.
Yeah, you can't do that.
But if they offer like Simone Nemitz or something like that, and
I was going to say Nemitz, and plus, but I don't think that the Devils are willing to. I would think you'd have to take roster players off that team to make that trade, and depending on how they do in the postseason, then maybe you do it. But that would take a lot. That would really, really take a lot. Yeah, it'd be a fantastic.
It'd be fun to see all three of those guys.
Oh yeah, skating together. That would be unbelievable. But I just think that Quinn is way too valuable to this team right now.
Yeah,
he's the one reliable defensive. See, it went south when they got rid of Christopher Tanev. Christopher Tanev was really Quinn Hughes' rabbi, and he hasn't really had a guy since then. And his play suffered for a while, but now he's found his skates and he's playing a lot better. But that would be a massive move. I just don't see Vancouver as poorly as they've done to construct this team. Trading Quinn Hughes, wow, you'd have to get 3 or 4 back for that. I just don't see that happening at this point.
Yeah. But one thing they did do, they finally got a big body out there that can really score in Timo Meier. So that is the Devils' way of saying, we believe in what we're doing this year and we're going for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're without question. Look, guys, first round, and I know people, reseed. It doesn't matter how you seed. Regardless if it was 1-8 or divisional, you're having Toronto and Tampa and the Devils and Rangers playing in the first round. So guess what? 100-point team's going home. A really good team's going to go home. People are going to whine. And my response to you is, you got to beat good teams in the playoffs. It's as simple as that. Like, give me the last team that people said, oh, you know what? They had a really easy path to winning the Stanley Cup. It doesn't happen. You play really good teams off the bat. You got to win 16 games. That's why the trophy is the best in all sports, because it's so hard to win. But yeah, the Devils, again, I think the team that will give the Hurricanes the most problem, not the Devils, if they even get out, are the Rangers. The Rangers can beat and they can score on that team. Like, you remember last year in the playoffs, Game 7, the big guys stood up. Granted, Carolina was banged up in net. But like 2 weeks ago, they went into Carolina, they won 6-2, and Breadman scored 4 goals. They're not afraid of that team. And to add what they added, that's fine. So I think that first round matchup between the Devils and Rangers is going to be incredible, right? Especially if Vanacek keeps playing this way. But it could be the Rangers and Kane. So, yes, they had to make that move. He fits in well there. And, again, yes, the Devils have done it the right way. Now, to one point about the Devils, like, okay, I get it. But when you have 2 first overall picks on your team at center, at some point you got to be good. So, yeah, I get it. They've made some good moves. Yeah, getting John Marino's good. Siegenthaler's emerged. Dougie Hamilton's been of value. but there was some lottery luck here. Let's be real. To have those two guys on your team, like that wasn't like great moves by Tom Fitzgerald. And sometimes you have to work with the luck. So, yeah, it's an arms race, but there's going to be a really, really good or two really good teams that are going to be out in the first round. But it's better than last year when we knew 8 teams were in it at Christmas. And now there's playoff races. There's playoff races at the top for the Metro Division, and there's playoff races at the bottom because there's basically about 5 teams for 2 wildcard spots.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And going back out west, the Oilers with a really big move, getting a solid defensive defenseman, Matthias Ekholm, cost him Tyson Barrie, Reed Schaefer, the first-round draft pick, and a 4th in 23 and 24 respectively. But this is something the Oilers have really needed since Adam Larson left. Yeah,
they need a shutdown defenseman. Now, that said, they are taking away from the offense because Tyson Barrie is QB1 for the power play. And so, look, you'll put Bouchard in there, who hasn't had a great season. So you hope you can replace that. But yes, a necessary move, a shutdown defender, a guy they needed, a left side defenseman who's tough. Yeah, pricey, $6.25 million cap hit. And I think he is 32 years old. But yes, the necessary move that Kenny Holland had to make, it makes them better right now in the playoffs. May suffer a little bit on the power play, but I think they have still enough offense on that team to go deep, have a deep playoff run.
Yeah. Behind the Patrick Kane deal, a lot of people are saying, hey, the Flyers actually paid more or got more for Claude Giroux than Patrick Kane. I think a lot of this, because there were similar situations in that both players were stars and they in the latter part of their careers, and they both had no move protection and wanted to only go to one team. So in this particular case, Patrick Kane only wanted to go to Rangers, but he's about 75% of what he normally was. I don't know if he's got a hip, a groin, or a knee. Maybe you could tell us more about the dynamics of why the price was what it was.
Because, like you mentioned, the Hawks were boxed in. He wanted to go to one place. Didn't want to go to Carolina. Didn't want to go to Vegas. Just wanted New York. So, then Chris Drury took advantage of that. Didn't even offer a conditional second and some plus. I get it. Like you do. Here's what look. Either the guy walks or you trade him. You do the best you can do, and that's the best he could do because you have it's not a seller's market when there's only one buyer, right? So yeah, maybe the Flyers did get a little bit more for Giroux, but again, in the grand scheme of things, is he hurt? Is he not 100%? He's not 100%. But if you watch him the last couple of games, he scored a hat trick. Yeah, he'll help the Rangers, right? And he's not because he's not called upon to do that much. You're adding him to a really great top 6. You have Zibanejad, who's never going to get enough credit. Like he's going to be always underrated. You have Breadman. You have Chris Kreider. Like Vinny Trocheck's been a great ad. So he doesn't have to be that dominant player he once was. Does he make them better on right wing without question? He's better than Jimmy Vesey, right? There's no question about that. Jimmy Vesey goes to the 4th line. He's on the 2nd line. It makes them better in a moment. Like, is there some risk involved? Yeah, but they didn't mortgage the future for Patrick Kane. Like they certainly didn't. Like they're going all in. They have to. But like it's just a situation where the return was underwhelming. Again, it's only a situation where there was really only one buyer. And, Davidson did the best he could in Chicago.
Yeah.
Isaiah, you mentioned the Flyers trade with Florida with Giroux. Yeah, I mean, I think even at the time, more people were kind of angry at Giroux for boxing the Flyers in with basically his demands to only go to Florida. Some people thought, maybe he'd open it up to Colorado. And ultimately, it doesn't sound like he did. He wanted assurances from Chuck Fletcher that they were going to try and re-sign him in the offseason to open up his trade list a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, the return is going to end up being pretty good because Owen Tippett has become one of the better scorers on the Flyers. He's really developed into a good power forward this year. And look, the Flyers got the Florida Panthers first-round pick next year. Right now, the Panthers pick this year would be number 14. Next year we'll see what happens, but it's conceivable they could be a non-playoff team. Now that pick is top 10 protected next year, but they could be a pick from 11 through 20 that ends up being in that trade. So that, in retrospect, that's going to end up being one of Chuck Fletcher's better moves.
Yeah, totally agree. Absolutely. And I really loved Owen Tippett. I'm glad he's emerging. He's a good kid. Met him a couple of times. So I'm happy for him. And he's been a productive player in a season that has been great for the team.
So DB, looking forward, less than 48 hours away from the trade deadline. Like the question has to be asked, what's left? I mean, it's like feast on scraps time. I mean, outside of maybe Bertuzzi and some other names on the fourthperiod.com trade list. JVR maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, second and third tier deals. That's what you're going to have. It's as simple as that. So it won't excite anybody, but I don't think we're going to stop here. Like I mentioned, Kings, like you're going to see bottom 6 forwards go. You're going to see maybe a 5, 6, 7 defenseman go. So there'll be more trades, but they're not going to be. I think the biggest name would be Tyler Bertuzzi, if that's the case. So, that's what we have with respect to that. So I'm not totally excited about that prospect, but all the big names have really gone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at guys like you mentioned Parayko and Torrey Krug as a possibility, as well as Klingberg, defensemen that, some that have term and a lot of term, like Parayko. And then, of course, Klingberg is a UFA to be. Yeah,
I don't, again, there could be a lot. See, the one thing, if you're a fan of this stuff and trade deadline stuff, what this does tee up is that you can now see that our teams are being more creative. So what's going to happen in the summertime when everybody has more cap space, when you have a better handle on, where don't have the pressure of time. So I think this could behoove a lot of activity by the time we get to free agency, to free agent frenzy, that you could see a lot more deals. Because again, there's more than one way to skin a cat here. Throw the additional picks at people, get a third team involved. And so that's what augurs well. But yeah, these big names like a Parayko, there's not enough time and there's not enough cash space, to be frank, to pull off these big deals. Now, could it happen? It could. But again, there's only one Jacob Chikrin who's under $5 million a year. These other guys have lengthy contracts with big cap hits. It's going to take, as we mentioned, heavy lifting to get that done. But I think in the summertime, you could see a lot more big deals based on what we see in this trade deadline with respect to the activity and how the trades are done. There's a paradigm shift on how things are getting done in this league, which is great because for the longest time, there's been really no creativity when it comes to making trades.
Believe me, we know. Last one from me. I like that. Lars Eller goes to Colorado. Now he's more of a third line center, is a UFA. Does that represent their move at center and they're kind of done, or what else do you think they might do to defending Stanley Cup champions?
Yeah, because I think they're betting on Comfort as a 2C. Now you could move Eller up to 2C, and he serviceable 2C. He's not Nas Kadri, right? And that's who was there last year, and that's why they won a cup, because he was incredible. 80-point season, played great in the playoffs. Lars Eller isn't that guy. I think they're making a big bet on JT Comfort, and maybe they could make the moves. I would have thought that before Taves got ill and had long COVID, that would have been a fit. Ryan O'Reilly seemed the natural there, and they went to a lesser player in hopes that Nathan McKinnon and hopefully Landeskog comes back, and Rantanen, who nobody talks about, who should be in the MVP conversation, even with Connor McDavid, and he's going to win it. Like, they have a lot of talent. And if McCarr comes back healthy, that's a smart move. It's not a big bet. It's a small bet. And again, they're just betting on now Eller, Comfort, and Alex Newhook to play behind McKinnon in the middle. That might work, but we'll see. But they're clearly, even with that trade, they're not as good as they were last year, without question. Like, there's questions about Georgiev in the playoffs. Will he be the same thing that Darcy Kemper was? So, look, they are trending towards being the favorites because now they got hot. People are coming back. But are they going to walk through the West? No, I don't think so. I think it's a very different team this year. So I get the move because they had to bolster the center position, but not to the degree I think they really need to say, okay, this team is as good as the one last year. I think it's clearly not as good an Avalanche team.
DB, did you see, I just saw, just scrolling through Twitter, the Kings actually acquired a young goalie who's on my fantasy team, actually. Yeah. Eric Portillo from he's the goalie for Michigan, and he's been up and down in college. He was a pretty big prospect. He's a really big kid. But the Sabres or the Kings gave up a 3rd round pick in this year's draft for him. So they must feel that he's a pretty legitimate goalie prospect.
They do, and they have nothing in the system, Dan. That's why. The only 2 goalies they have signed after this year are Copley and Peterson, and they have nothing in the pipeline. That's legitimate NHL potential. This kid is. Whether he makes it or not, that's another story, but that's a way for them to build their pipeline with respect to goaltending talent. I assume that if they hadn't used that pick this year, that they would have drafted a goalie because there's really nothing in the system. So it's a smart move, and that kid has potential. That's why they made that move, because of the lack of depth goaltending-wise in the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Gotcha. Well, that is all from me, DB. Maybe one last. Any surprises, anything that might, in the back of your mind, that we could look for as fans, just in general, not Philadelphia, league-wide, in terms of player movement or anything like that?
Well, if Jonathan Quick lands up in Vegas and the Kings play the Golden Knights in the first round, that'll be something. So, and if he doesn't move, Columbus comes back to LA in a couple of weeks. I assume we would play in a game, maybe reports, but I'm not sure that. And when Kekalani was asked about that, he said, we talked to his reps and we talked to him, and we'll see. We'll see. Like the trade deadline's Friday, so are you going to flip him? Is he going to even report? So just keep your eyes on Jonathan Quick. Does he ultimately wind up in Columbus, or does he get flipped to a contender like Vegas? That's going to be really intriguing over the next couple of hours. Yeah,
no, absolutely. DB, you're a busy man. Where can people catch up with you on social and your podcasts and other places?
If you don't know where I am by now, you're really unaware of the hockey world. But all kidding aside, my Twitter feed is Dennis TFP, like the fourth period. You mentioned Hot Stove from 11 to 1 Eastern every Saturday. This Friday, after the trade deadline's over, me, Steve Coolise, and Dave Nonis will be on SiriusXM from 3 to 6 to recap all the activity. Kings in a podcast you mentioned, and then Dave and I do a podcast, the Edge Work podcast for the Hammer betting network as well, every Wednesday. That should be released soon. So it's not hard to find me, Isaiah, if you want to find me.
Fantastic. DB, we got to do this again at some point, maybe in the off season when the inevitable changes happen with the Flyers. I really appreciate you stopping by.
Isaiah, Dan, always great being on the O&B Puckcast. Thanks for the time.
Yep.
Cheers.
Thanks. Take care. Well, Dan, DB has kind of filled this in. I mean, it's a kind of reverse show. I mean, we actually did a review, a trade deadline review in advance because of everything that's happened. How many trades are going down, and there's not a lot left.
It's crazy how much has happened already this past week in the NHL from a trade perspective. I mean, it's wild. And yet Chuck Fletcher has not done anything except for trade away Isaac Ratcliffe, who they mismanaged his player development. I'm not sure if he ever would have become a good player or not, but Ron Hextall traded away 2 draft picks to move up in the second round and take Isaac Ratcliffe. Isaac Ratcliffe is a 6'4" winger who scored 60 goals in juniors, 50 or 60 goals. He reminded me of Eric Daze, who was a big guy with the Chicago Blackhawks with great hands, great skill, not physical at all. Isaac Ratcliffe is not a physical player, at least he wasn't in juniors. Reminded me of him, kind of like a boom or bust type of prospect. Right. Ratcliffe had a number of injuries across the first few years of his career, but then what happened is the Flyers tried to make him into a fourth-line banger, a mucker and a grinder. It was never, ever in a million years going to work. That's not what his strengths are. And, they traded him away for nothing, for future considerations. Who knows what the future considerations are? Look, he had 2 goals this year in the AHL. He probably wasn't going to get there, but the Flyers player development being a disaster did not help him at all. Anyway, that's the only move that the Flyers have made so far. Every single team in the NHL looks like they're doing something. The contenders are doing things. The non-contenders are doing things. And yet here we are, and there's nothing going on. It is just unbelievable.
I think I read something on Twitter after the Chychrun deal about all the assets that Arizona has. And it's true. Arizona has been horrible, like really god awful for what, a decade or so, right? But now, after this trade that they just made, the Coyotes have 21 picks in the top 3 rounds for the next 4 drafts or something like that. So, they have 2 firsts, a second, 3 thirds, a fourth, 2 fifths, and a 6th in this upcoming draft. In 24, I have a first, 4 seconds, 3 thirds, 2 fourths. After that, doesn't matter.
Which team is this? Arizona?
This is Arizona. Okay, 5,000 seat stadium with, and they're still getting revenue sharing. But I digress. And in 25, they still have their first, and they have 4 seconds, 2/3, a fourth, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, obviously, the Flyers were never going to tank to that degree. But after, the thing I keep coming back to is they went 2-7-1 in February, and basically it just fell off a cliff. And this is after they were ready. Now, I don't know. We got this. You've read this, where they were this close to moving on from Fletcher, installing Danny. And maybe the big conversation was, well, should Chuck stay as a president, like a titular head of president of operations, or should he just be jettisoned? Then the Flyers play picked up between the holiday and the All-Star break. And they said, you know what, maybe we have something here. And then February happened, and they have some of the worst stats, scoring 1.8 goals a game, allowed 4 goals a game. Their power play was 11.8%. Their penalty kill was killing at 66.7%. Thank you, Jordan Hall, for those numbers. And it's just like it all fell apart. And then you had the Seattle game, the disaster, and then the back-to-back losses versus Montreal, a team that was missing 13 players. And then it just shut out like the Devils, reminiscent of like the 9-2 games versus the Rangers. Only the Flyers never really quit. At least that's one thing Tortorella's done right. But the bottom line is, coming off a 61-point season, what the hell in the world were they looking at last year, re-signing Ristolainen and going after, and later in the offseason saying, you know what, we got to get a defenseman with Provorov. And what did they give? A second, third, and a fourth for D'Angelo, and give him the $5 million for 2 years, 5.1. Like, nothing makes any sense. And it's like they're back to square one, and they're tracking to between 70 and 75 points on their current pace.
It's, it is so frustrating what is going on. And then to have Chuck Fletcher have this press conference a few days ago where he, like I said, he spews that ridiculous stat saying that, well, we've got the 5th best improvement on winning percentage in the league, which is wrong. At the time that he said it, they were 6th. Now they're 7th. But the way that he kind of like, at the beginning of the season, in the offseason, Charlie O'Connor said, is this a rebuild? Like, is this a retool? And he goes, it's a retool, Charlie. Like, in the offseason, he was outright sort of, I can't think of the word, but he was,
indignant.
He was indignant that people would suggest this was a rebuild. And now he has this press conference a few days ago where he sort of casually is acknowledging that it's basically like a rebuild, right? But the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, does he think that we're all morons? I mean, clearly he does. I don't know how he still has a job. I don't know what's going on with the people above him. Again, my only hope with this franchise right now is John Tortorella, and hopefully that his influence will sort of have some sway in the offseason. Like, Tortorella clearly doesn't want Kevin Hayes on this team. They got to find a way to get rid of him. The problem is that it seems like Chuck Fletcher is a joke among the NHL general managers. They know that they can rip him off. They know that it just seems like the NHL GMs have agreed with each other that they're not going to play in the sandbox with Chuck, and they won't listen to his offers. It's a bad situation right now. I mean, the fact that they haven't made any moves this week yet, maybe I really hope I eat my words and he ends up trading JVR for a 2nd round pick. But at this point, I'll be surprised if they even get a 3rd round pick for him.
He's in the lineup with Braun tonight. You know why? Because when he came back from the surgery, he hasn't really played. He hasn't scored in 12 games or something like that? 11, 12 games?
Well, what did he have? A hand surgery? What did he have?
I think hand or finger surgery or something like that. And he hasn't been the same guy. And I think what they're doing is they're trying to get him to display that he can play. You got to pray and hope as we record this tonight. And the Flyers, we're recording it right before the Rangers game tonight. And that he shows something. And maybe there's some scouts that are still interested. I mean, even at his best, JVR does not come off like a playoff kind of guy, even though he was very good versus Boston for the Flyers and against Boston for Toronto in some of those playoffs. But his net front presence hasn't been there except for that one play where he did a baseball bat into the net I forget what game that was, and that was encouraging. But that was like the last time he scored, I believe. And it's just, why would you play a guy who's so obviously, it's like the last game before the trade deadline? Why is he playing?
There's no point. Well, especially they have 7 defensemen dressing tonight. Why are they playing Braun? Like maybe JVR, they're trying to show teams that he's not injured.
Right.
Why in the world would you ever? And by the way, JVR, when he didn't play over the weekend, instead of saying he's banged up, they should have just said, we're holding him out. We're holding him out, because the trade deadline's coming up. Instead, they say
that lying about injuries anyway, right?
They didn't have to. Everyone's lying about injuries. They didn't have to say that he's banged up. Like, what are you doing? And now Braun, literally, even though they will probably only get a 5th or 6th round pick for Braun, they are dressing 7 defensemen tonight. Why are you playing Braun? It's insanity.
You know what it speaks to, Dan? It speaks to, in spite of what Chuck Fletcher went out there and said, that was more in accord with what we've been hearing from Tortorella most of the year. Okay. For the first time, they sounded like they were somewhat on the same page. The fact is, it is my conviction, and I bet you agree, that he really doesn't feel that way. He's still trying to salvage like the 1920 season. He's still seeing the roots of that and trying to fix that and repair and work around that. He has to be. He just looks like he's constipated. Look, he hasn't been able to move his bowels for several days when he's in front of that audience. And he talks about, there's no quick fixes, there's no Band-Aids, and we've been on the same page, more or less. We've kind of known what we're going to do with this as soon as Couturier and Atkinson went out. But he still went out and got, what's his name? Tony D'Angelo. And he's still, even when they had early rumblings that Couturier was having problems, that this could last and be a problem, they still tried to salvage this thing. I think he still wants Couturier and Atkinson all in the lineup just to prove his point. It's like he's being forced to say this. And there's a disconnect. He has to go. I have never, watching this team all this time, I've never seen an executive that is so primed to be blown the F out as Chuck Fletcher. And yet, here we are. It's a trade deadline. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, I don't know. There's 2 hopes. The first hope is the fact that we have John Tortorella here. The second thing that's giving me hope is that we are going to have between a 6 to an 8% chance of getting Bedard. We are going to have a 6 to an 8% chance of getting Fantilli or Michkov. That is a hope. I'm a poker player. When you get dealt a pocket pair, you've got about a 13% chance of hitting a set on the flop. It's about the same thing for the Flyers here to get the first or second pick. So that's giving me some hope, right? But I mean, other than that, there's no hope. None.
It's a cluster F. They're in one of the worst situations they've been in their history. And people would say, oh, you're exaggerating. But see, when you've been penetrated by incompetence and you're living in a bubble, you really don't have a sense of it, even though you'll hear from some of the beats and people like Anthony Sanfilippo and some of the other people. And, I talked to some people from TFP and they tell me, yeah, we talked to them. They know where they're at. They know what's going on. But the actions speak louder than words. The guy who's actually in charge of making those decisions doesn't act like they know where they're at. Or looking at the vantage point of last year, they would have gone completely different. They would have extra first-round draft pick. It might not have conveyed until 2024 for Ristolainen. And God bless him, he's played much better this year. There's no doubt about it. He would have waited on Sanheim, like you said. I mean, look at all the guys that Tortorella has dissed this year that were signed to long-term contracts. I mean, even Tony D'Angelo come in here, got benched. And Sanheim gets benched in front of his home crowd, just like who was Joel Farabee. He would have been benched. But
the funny thing is that poor Sanheim, when originally when it was between him, Haig, and Morant on who was going to make the team back in the Hextall era, I think that, right, everyone assumed it was going to be Sanheim and Morant. And then I think that, well, Haig definitely made it. And then I think they healthy scratched Sanheim for like the first or second game, and his whole family had come in to watch him make his NHL debut, and they'd healthy scratched him. I remember posting a photo of him like on the bench, like looking absolutely miserable. And now it happens again. But the whole Sanheim thing, I said this at the time that they signed him. I said, you just brought in John Tortorella, who said that he wants to evaluate the team moving forward, and then you sign Sanheim to an 8-year extension. Why couldn't you wait? Why couldn't you wait and let Tortorella evaluate Sanheim and give you input if he wants him here? No, Chuck had to go and sign this guy to the long-term deal. I mean, the whole thing is just insanity.
It is. It is.
This is like an hour of therapy. This is good.
Yeah, I mean, I get off your chest because you really, you've been away and all that. I don't know what else to say. I mean, everything. I mean, almost every player that Chuck Fletcher made a commitment to has gone through the mill, and Kevin Hayes obviously sitting out and on the trade block, doesn't look like he's going to be here. Ivan Provorov clearly does not want to be here, even though he's grown in my estimation and value. In my eyes,
looks completely disinterested out there.
He's played better recently, but
I don't think he wants to be here, to your point.
No, he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to keep losing. That's what it is. And you have Tortorella out there saying next year is still going to be another grind. We're still going to have pain next year. It's like, okay, well, if that's the case, why aren't we selling more guys? I mean, like I said earlier, there are general managers like Patrick Alvin. I don't know what he's doing getting heroic for some of those assets and all that, but there are in Arizona, you have to have that mindset where you have to get rid of about 4 or 5 guys, at least get one out the door before you get to summer. So, you don't have a big Mount Everest to climb as a general manager, whoever that person's going to be. And obviously the feeling in the air with the general manager throughout the league is let's go, let's deal, let's make a deal. And here we are, nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say anymore, Isaiah. I don't know what to say anymore. I hope that they are able to get something for JVR and Braun, not even just for the pick and who they'll get, but just to show that they're doing something. I don't know. I don't know. I think that I think the likely scenario is that, I don't know, Chuck was trying to get more than he thought he was going to get, and then teams moved away from him, and now he's just kind of like sitting there waiting. My guess is he's going to trade both those players for much less than we thought they were going to bring, just because he's got no other options.
And here's another clue. It's going to be my last major point tonight. The fact that they were looking at Jordan Greenway, okay? And the thing is, they're going to take that money on, but they were going to probably get a higher pick as a result. But in general, again, this speaks to what I said earlier about Chuck Fletcher still is not convinced. He's still trying to find reclamation projects. And they're trying to put Jordan Greenway in the same category as Owen Tippett. Owen Tippett really didn't get as much of an opportunity as some of these other players people were talking about. Maybe Goryanov, another guy they were connected with Dallas before Dallas opted for somebody else. And I forget who they went with instead of JVR. But again, they're trying to get guys, and when they draft players, they draft players that are more likely to be ready sooner. You don't make draft picks like that. You've heard them say that in the past too. They'll be quicker to the pros, ready sooner. This is a guy who's trying to save his job. When you're passing up on draft picks for players who've already fallen down and so on and so forth. So I'll leave it there because we're going to have another show coming up next week. Wrapping up everything that so-called happened. And I know you got to scram. So why don't you give us your final thoughts and social media?
I'm all thought it out, Isaiah. I don't know. I feel like I'm in one of those fighters in the ultimate fighting thing, and I'm being strangled and I got to tap out. You know what I mean? I just got to tap out, man. I can't take any more Chuck Fletcher. So, but yeah, folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88. I've been having a lot of very scathing, sarcastic tweets about the Flyers recently. So maybe some of you guys will enjoy those. Maybe you won't. If you think I'm being too over the top, that's fine. Let me know. But yeah, at DSilver88.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And you can find me, Isaiah, ISAIAH _520 Isaiah. Don't forget the _520. I too have been pretty scathing on both this account when I run the O&B Puckcast account out at O&B Puck at O&B Puck on Twitter. We're not holding back anymore. We think Chuck Fletcher's got to go. I think Dave Scott has to go. I think Dave Scott really is the problem. Dave Scott is the one who could pull the trigger on this. And you might as well take all the advisors with you. So, while they're at it. So I'm going to hang out for a little bit and discuss a couple little things. And Dan has to make his exit. Okay. So as we wrap things up before we get rolling, I just wanted to mention a couple different things because I didn't want to leave these out. It looks like Travis Konechny is maybe going for the season. Not really sure. We got to find out. He either has a shoulder or a collarbone injury. Have to pay close attention to that. It's also going to be a tight timeline for Sean Couturier to come back, and we'll have to take a close watch at that. Obviously, the player wants to come back, and it would really be helpful for the Flyers to know if he can play after all this time, like 14 months or so, without playing any NHL games. And I don't think a conditioning stint would be advisable. And plus, the Flyers are apparently committed to keeping a lot of young kids like Elliot Denoyer, even though he's playing tonight, he's going back down. They're even talking about sending Cam York down. And they want all these kids to grow, act like it's 2005 all over again with Carter and Richards, and they're winning the Calder Cup and getting experience, getting in a winning situation. But that's the Phantoms have to make the playoffs to have a playoff run. But Chuck Fletcher has a big problem with the fans. We're going to have a lot of fans who are not going to renew their season tickets. And it should be very interesting, at least in that case. So the Flyers have a busy March. After this game, they have several days off. And they play 4 in 7 nights, starting with the Red Wings on Sunday the 5th. Then they go on the road every other night. They play in Tampa, in Carolina, and then they're at Pittsburgh on Saturday the 11th. So we're going to put a wrap on tonight's show. Until next time, everybody, hoping the Flyers can do something that stirs people and puts us in a good direction here. Take care.